Let's start.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and tonight the Poison Pen is honored to have with us #1 New York Times best-selling author Carley Fortune.
Hi.
If you are new to the Poison Pen, we'd especially like to welcome you. And now is the point where I mention to find out which authors are coming to the bookstore, like Lisa Barr, who's going to be here tomorrow night. You should sign up for our e-news. That's real easy to do. On your way out, stop by the front. Each week you'll discover who's coming to the Poison Pen, what new books we have. It's really easy. As far as our format goes tonight, I think they told you all, but I'll repeat it just in case. Carley has pre-signed the books, but after our talk here in Q&A, she's going to be going upstairs to the annex where she'll personalize books and take photos. You should have a signing ticket number. We're going to keep you down here, bring you up in groups of 10 or so to get your book signed. So be sure you hold on to those numbers. I think that's all my commercial messages, so please join me in welcoming Carley Fortune.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming on this mild evening.
It's nothing like Canada, is it?
You know, it's hot in Toronto. It's hotter in Toronto than it is in LA right now, but This is something else. And I'm half Australian, so I'm a little embarrassed by... I keep walking outside and laughing at how hot it is. It's unreal.
Laugh or cry, I think those are your two choices here. My first question to you is because it's hard to believe, but there are some people who don't know who Carley Fortune is.
It's me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell us who was Carley before you became an author?
So sad, so alone. No, I was a journalist for 15 years. I'm Canadian. I grew up in a small town called Barry's Bay, and I always loved writing, and I loved stories, especially scary stories, but I didn't think you could be an author. That seemed very far-fetched to me, and I loved magazines. So I ended up studying journalism at school in Toronto, and I went to work as an editor as soon as I graduated, and kind of rose the ranks of Canadian media. I worked at Toronto Life magazine, which is kind of our version of New York magazine, as an online editor. I went to work at our kind of biggest national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, first in the life and arts section, and then as a deputy style editor, and, you know, worked my way up until I launched Refinery 29 Canada. So if you're familiar with Refinery 29, I brought that brand to Canada. I hired the editorial team. I oversaw that. And I realized, I'd worked so hard at my career. I really wanted to run a publication. And in 2019, I kind of looked around and I realized I was deeply unhappy. And it was a very stressful work call in 2020 that had me saying, I'm going to write a book.
And that led to your first book, which was Every Summer
That's
After.
right. Yes, it did.
And if I understand correctly, it was an interesting process because you looked at the amount of time you had.
Yes.
And divided the word count for a book. And
that's
just
right.
wrote.
Yes, I figured out. So it was July of 2020, and I was like, I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna finish it by the end of the year. So I counted the days left in the year, figured out that a manuscript was about 80,000 words, did the math, and it gave me a daily word count of 388 words. And I thought, I work with writers, reporters who file way more than that in a day with original reporting. I could make up 388 words a day. And so I would get up at the time. I have 2 boys now, but at the time I had 1 son. And so I'd get up at 5 a.m. before he was awake and before I started work and write from 5 to 6. And sometimes on the evenings after he went to bed, and then on the weekends, my husband would take him to the park and I'd write, and I finished my draft in 4 months. Yeah. It was like I was overtaken by an external force. It was really magical and special, and I felt like I was 36, and I felt like I'd finally figured out what I was meant to be doing, which was a huge relief.
But your experience in journalism kind of prepared you for novel writing because, in a sense, you were telling stories back in journalism.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And one thing that I used to do as an editor in journalism is I call it fantasy editing, where somebody will pitch a story or you'll come up with a story and you'd be like, yeah, that would be good if the wife had murdered the brother, and that like you have to kind of figure out whether a story is newsworthy, and oftentimes it isn't. And with fiction, you just make it up. It's like, oh, this can be a story because I'm making it up. And there was one point I remember when I was writing Every Summer After that I got stuck, and the characters felt so real to me, and I was writing about how I grew up and where I grew up, so that was very real to me. And I got stuck, and then I was like, wait a second, this isn't real. I'm just making it up. And it felt like I was doing something very sneaky, having come from journalism, and it was so fun. It was so fun.
So your first book was published, and then you went on to write your next book, Meet Me at the Lake. It was a totally different experience, wasn't it?
It was awful. It was so terrible. Yeah, it was. So Every Summer After was very smooth and delightful. And then editing the book was also very odd, like rare experience where I was in edits for 2 weeks before it was sent to copy editing. And Meet Me at the Lake, I had just given birth to my second son when I was starting to write, and my mental health after I've had both my babies is really, really bad, terrible. And so I was full of anxiety, and I didn't think, like couldn't imagine how I had pulled off Every Summer After. It felt like a fluke. I remember I took out the notebook that I kept when I wrote Every Summer After, and I flipped through the pages to try to figure out how I had done it. And every day I sat down on the first draft, it was just all that terrible self-talk where it's like, you suck, the book sucks, you'll never, like, you can't, Every Summer After was a fluke. And this was before Every Summer After had been published. Like, Every Summer After went on to be a big hit, but at that time it hadn't been published. So this was all kind of my stuff, and having an editor I didn't want to disappoint. And the first draft took about 8 months, and every day, honestly, an hour or two of just battling my own self-talk. And then I got the edit back on my first draft, and there was a suggestion in there that was a brilliant suggestion that required me to delete half the book and rewrite it in 2 months. So it was a very, very different process than Every Summer After.
You wrote something in that book that I thought was rather insightful. We go through our darkest moments alone, but we emerge from them with help.
Yeah,
very true.
I think it's true too. Or it feels like we go through our darkest moments alone. Yeah, and that's something like I really have experienced myself. As I write about this in Meet Me at the Lake, I experienced postpartum OCD and postpartum anxiety, and my OCD symptoms were extraordinarily bad, and they're really brutal and hard to talk about. And I didn't tell anyone because it was too scary to tell anybody, but when I finally worked out the courage to tell my husband, and then the next day my doctor, and talk to the nurses, that alone alleviated symptoms. And it really is true when it comes, like, the idea of talking, like, it really does help to share what's going on inside of us. It doesn't make everything better, but we do need other people supporting us.
So now we come to your new book, This Summer Will Be Different.
Yes.
And you decided it was going to be a different process. You were going to have fun.
I was going to have fun. I was determined to have fun, which I wanted to with Meet Me at the Lake too, but no.
And actually, I think, was it Taylor Jenkins Reid that gave you some advice?
Well, I interviewed, you're a very good researcher. I appreciate that. I had interviewed Taylor Jenkins Reid for a virtual launch that she did for Carrie Sato Is Back, the tennis book. And she did this virtual launch for Indigo, which is a Canadian book chain. And I was her conversation partner. And when I was reading that book, from the kind of first chapter, you're really thrown into it, and it's very fast paced and compelling, and feels like a thrill ride. Like, I was like, oh, this is like, I can't wait to go on this ride. And she said that it was the most fun she had ever had writing. And it didn't surprise me. It's like I felt it on the page, and I was like, I want that. I want to have that experience of just having such a good time with a book. So there was that, and the other thing that really kind of inspired me at the time, which seems so unrelated, was the TV show The Bear, which I had just watched the first season of The Bear. And the first episode, the pilot episode, you are thrown into the action and you're like, what is even going on? And my first draft of This Summer Will Be Different was a bit different, and I threw you into the like breakup scene, and so I was experimenting with something that didn't really work out in the end, but it was that kind of energy, that like propulsive energy, and that spirit of having fun that I wanted.
Tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. Yeah. It's about Lucy, who goes to Prince Edward Island on vacation. Prince Edward Island is this beautiful island off the east coast of Canada. And she walks into a restaurant, seafood restaurant, and orders a dozen oysters from the shucker at the bar. Very cute guy. And they end up spending a memorable night together, only to realize the next morning that he is her best friend's younger brother, and very, very off limits. And they promise it's never going to happen again. They're not going to tell Lucy's best friend and Felix's sister, Bridget, about it. But every time Lucy returns to Prince Edward Island with her best friend, Bridget, she finds she can't really stay away from Felix, and they're really drawn to each other physically. And their kind of relationship plays out over a number of these visits until this summer. Bridget has fled to Prince Edward Island in the days before her wedding. She's asked Lucy to come out there. Won't tell her what's going on, but she needs her on the island. So Lucy goes, and she says, this summer I'm going to help my best friend. She is determined not to fall in bed with Felix again. And she, like, for once, like, the summer is going to be the summer that is different. But when she gets to the island, Bridget is acting very strangely, and Felix is not quite the same either. And she's trying to figure them both out. Yeah.
There is a strong romance at the core of the book between Lucy and Felix, but you also write about other kinds of love. And I appreciate that, about friendship in particular.
Yes, friendship. Yeah. The idea of the book came from a trip I took to Prince Edward Island with my best friend when we were in our early 20s. And my best friend, her name is Meredith. This book is dedicated to Meredith. And she had been to Prince Edward Island before. She has an aunt who lives on the island. And so the two of us, it was our first trip together. We decided we would not eat anything that came from the land. We would only eat seafood. We rented a car. It was this this PT Cruiser, like funny car. And we had drove all around the island together. We had never driven together because we lived in Toronto, so we didn't have cars. And I fell in love with the island, but I also fell in love with my best friend more. And there were a couple of things that really stuck with me. One was when we were there, the Canadian National Oyster Shucking Championship was taking place in Tyne Valley, a community of 300 people at the arena. And so we went to the oyster fry across the road at the fire hall beforehand, and then we walked across the street to the arena and sat all night watching the shuckers compete. And people come from all over the country to compete, and it was so much fun. And we ate so many oysters, and we made so many bad shucking puns. We got lost on the way back in the woods. Like, it was such a good time. And the other thing that really stuck with me was when we got off the plane, when we first got into Prince Edward Island, and when you land in PEI, it's a teeny tiny place, so you get right off on the tarmac. So we got off on the tarmac, got in our PT Cruiser, and we went straight into Charlottetown to the wharf and ordered oysters from the oyster shucker at the bar. And I remember him being cute. I don't know if that's right. This is 16 years ago. And he said, "Where are you in from?" And we said, "Toronto." And he looked me in the eye and he said, "I'm sorry. Welcome home." And that kind of island charm really, really stuck with me. And so when I was pitching ideas for this book, and I pitched a number of ideas, but for this book, the only thing I had was best friends, girls trip, Prince Edward Island. So it started with the friendship.
And competitive oyster shucking really is a thing?
It
I
is.
guess?
It's a thing. I should look up where the shucking competition is in the United States. So yeah, so all the shuckers in countries all over the world do like their qualifying championship, and then everyone goes to Ireland to compete at the Worlds. It's a shuck off. And it's a big deal. And in Prince Edward Island, they have a Guinness Book of World Records record for like a team of shuckers shucking the most oysters in whatever amount of time. So, and it's a community thing too, right? It's really fun, and I love oysters.
I love how you write about romance. You're very skilled at that, but you
Thank
also talk about some other themes in the book, and one I think was important for some readers to process and think about in their own lives. You wrote that no one person can be your everything.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that there's a lot of pressure on partners and best friends to provide so much emotional support and to fulfill us. And we expect a lot of our partners and our best friends. And as the older I've grown, the more I've realized that when you have people who, for example, I have a friend, I call her my PF, my professional friend. She is the person that I turn to when something comes up professionally and I want to talk it out with. My husband doesn't really, like, he'll listen happily, but he's not going to engage with me into the deep level that I require, that Courtney does. And I have a friend who's like my fashion friend, and I messaged her today, like, what does one wear to X, Y, and Z? Or we send pictures of tops we like to each other. And it is really nice to realize that you don't have to go to one or two or three people for everything, that you can have a friend who is your professional friend, but doesn't have to be the person who you send your clothes pictures to. And I think like taking that pressure off the people who really matter to us is important, because it's true. No one person can be everything for you, and nor should they be.
Given that your heroine protagonist's name is Lucy, and the book is set on Prince Edward Island, there must be some connection with Anne of Green Gables.
Yes, Anne of Green Gables, the classic written by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Yes, there's lots of Anne of Green Gables references in this book. And Lucy is one of my favorite girls' names. The way I name my characters is that I have a list of boys' names that my husband vetoed when we were naming our boys, which they all like Sam, Will, they're all Felix. Like they're all in there. I still haven't used my top favorite name, but one day I will. And we didn't have a girl, but there are girls' names on them too. And Lucy's actually the only one so far that was on that list. And when I was looking at the list of names, I was like, Lucy. Oh, Lucy Maud. Like it has to be Lucy. And I loved Anne of Green Gables growing up, both the book, but in particular the movies. There were these 1980s movies. I see some nodding. Yes, dual VHS. They played on PBS in the States and there's CBC in Canada. They starred Megan Follows as Anne and Jonathan Crombie as Gilbert Blythe. And I was obsessed. Like we had them taped off of CBC, and I lived in they were very grainy because I lived in the bush and like it wasn't good quality. And I swear I wore out those VHSs. I tried to dye my hair red. Megan follows shade of red so many times with like box hair dye that I got frustrated that I couldn't get it right. I saved up my money, went to a hair salon when I was 16 and asked her for that shade of red. And she said, "You have ruined your hair so spectacularly from dyeing it with like drugstore box dye that I need to chop it off." Which is a real Anne Shirley moment, if you know the story. She tries to dye her hair brown and it turns out green. And I think that those movies probably have the biggest influence on me in terms of a piece of pop culture. Like the romance is wonderful. There is a theme of found family. We have a woman who's a girl, then young woman, then woman, kind of figuring out her place in the world and who she is and what she wants. And friendship is a core theme. And I think the other thing is place and setting, and the way Anne Shirley, she's an orphan who comes. She's not from Prince Edward Island, and she falls in love with it. And she has these elaborate descriptions for the setting. And then, of course, the cinematography in the movies is gorgeous. And I like that's one of my favorite things to write is place and setting. So major influence on me.
One of the other things she did really well was Lucy's connection to flowers. You
Thank
can really
you.
see the flowers in the books and what she's doing.
Thank
What kinds of research did you do? Are you a gardener? Is that something that came natural?
It partly came naturally. My mom is she actually worked as a florist before I was born, and she did all the flowers for my wedding, and they were stunning. And she's a wonderful gardener. She particularly loves peonies, so she has so many peony plants, and I'm redoing my garden right now, so I've got all these new peonies coming in, and so I've always loved flowers. When I was really little, before I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a florist. So a lot of that, I did do a bit of research, but a lot of that is from me and my mom. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about you as a writer and your process. Does it change from book to book?
It does, yeah. I don't plan. I'm not a planner. I'm a pantser, as they say. And which I love, because I love the discovery in writing. Like, for example, in The Summer Will Be Different, one of the things that keeps you turning pages is you're trying to figure out what's going on with Bridget and what secret she's keeping. And I didn't know what was going on with Bridget. And I knew that something was going on. And it wasn't until the scene where Bridget is revealing to Lucy what's going on that it came to me, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's what's going on with Bridget. And it's so that's such a wonderful feeling to me when I'm writing. It's so much joy in that discovery. And then of course you go back and figure it out. But so I don't plan, but I do have like big moments sometimes that I want to hit on. But they have all been a little bit different in terms, like Every Summer After, I wrote it exactly as you read it. Like it goes now and then, these chapters, and that's how I wrote it. Meet Me at the Lake, I didn't do that. I wrote the past timeline altogether, and then we threw out the entire past timeline, and then I rewrote it. And This Summer Will Be Different. I was just like, I'm going to write a really messy first draft, and it's going to be chaos. And it was. And, but with the book I'm working on now, I spent a lot more time, not planning the plot exactly. I mean, with a romance, you know where it's coming to at the end. You don't know how they're going to get there or what that's going to look like. But I spent a lot of time figuring out who the characters were and what, their personal journeys would be, and what the kind of tension between them would be, and why you were invested in that story, what's keeping you turning the pages. And I spent, I knew who one of the characters would be. I had a really good idea of this character, but I didn't know who their love interest would be. So I spent a lot of time auditioning love interests. It felt like running like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. I even wrote like 11,000 words of completely different love interests. And I was like, this is not right, in the toilet. But having done that work really made the drafting process smoother.
Now that you're into book 4, what have you discovered about writing that you wish someone had told you when you were starting out?
That I was a good writer. Honestly. Yeah.
I think you discovered something else too that I thought was rather interesting. You've said that once you become a published author, your books are no longer your own.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's important.
You hand them over to all of you. Yeah. And I think logically I knew that when I was publishing my first book. I wrote Every Summer After, not with the intention of publishing it. When I set out, my intention was just to finish it. I wanted to show myself I could finish it. And then as I was writing it, I was like, well, this feels like a book. And I sent the first 20 pages to my best friend, and as I was working on them, and she was like, you are going to be an author. in all caps. And that really gave me confidence. And, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. We'll go on to a different tact. Carley is a reader. Because what fascinated me was your journey kind of mirrors a lot of people. You were a dedicated reader as a kid, fell out of reading, and then came back to it.
That's right. Yeah, I fell out of reading in university, so college. I studied journalism, but we took English. We had to take English courses all through university, and I was there on a student loan, and I had to. I lived in downtown Toronto. Our school was in downtown Toronto. It's just very expensive, so I had to also have a part-time job to help pay my rent and tuition, and I was working like in my last year, like 35 hours a week at my job. I had this huge journalism like big projects in my journalism courses. And then I had English classes where you have this, syllabus of books you're supposed to read. I hated English essays, hated them. And I couldn't keep up with the reading. And it was the first time where reading became work. And I really grew to dislike reading. And then I went to work as an editor, and then reading was my job. So the last thing that I wanted to do was come home and read. But also I found as an editor, and I worked at these wonderful publications, but in Canada, I think in particular, there is a very, I'm going to say snobby view on what kind of books people should be reading. And books that are worthy and the smart books. And I felt very outside that conversation. And there was kind of this competitive nature to it too, of like keeping up with what was going on in the world of books. And so I went away from it. And then in 2018, late 2018, the movie To All the Boys I'd Loved Before came out. And I was working at Refinery 29. And Refinery 29, in particular, the US edition, which was, all my colleagues, covered the hell out of that show. Like 13 articles a day. Like if Noah Centineo winked, like there were 700 words explaining it. It was unreal. And I was like, well, I'm going to watch this. I need to know what's going on. And I loved it. And I thought, well, I should read the book because I used to love reading these kinds of books when I was younger. And so I did, and I loved it. And I read that whole series, and I just kept reading. And I was really stressed out at work, and I was reading these YA books. I stopped watching TV. I was like, these books are so much more of an escape than TV. And then YA kind of led into romance. And I didn't know these books existed. Like, I had no clue. My experience with romance had been the books my grandmother read. My grandma was Australian, so she read I don't know if they were Harlequins there or Mills and Boone, and the like heaving bosoms, and like I love those covers. And she would have a stack beside her chair that she would tear through. And she said she didn't read the saucy bits, which were like, yeah, okay, Grandma. Like nobody believed her, and she knew we didn't believe her. But that was my only experience with romance, and so I didn't know about these contemporary stories and these stories that really are about the way we live and relate to each other. And my favorite books are very emotional and explore other parts of our lives. And I just became a huge romance reader. And when I decided to write a book, and it was 2020, I had been reading romance for about 18 months I hadn't realized as like an editor. So I knew that like something happened at 25% of the book, and halfway through at 75%. I had a feel for how the books worked, and I knew what I liked and what I didn't like. And I knew in 2020 I could only tolerate a happy ending. I couldn't deal with anything but a happy ending. Yeah.
What I love is that you champion the value of just reading for escape.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. It's so great. Yeah. We need that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas you're right there, I don't think it's unique to Canada. I think it's here in the U.S. too. There's this dismissal of genre fiction, of romance as being less than.
Yes.
For that. In fact, I think...
I feel so sorry for people who feel that way.
Yeah. Well, someone I think interviewed you and described your books as bodice rippers, and
Yes.
I wanted to say let's retire that back to the 1970s.
I
where it belongs.
know. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's no. I mean, if you want to read for escape, that's perfectly fine. If you want to read Dickens, that's fine too. There's nothing. There's no.
Reading is such a wonderful thing, to be a reader and whatever you're reading, what a joy, reading to learn, reading to escape, reading to improve yourself. It's all good. Audiobooks, and the judgment, I don't understand. I mean, I understand it, but I don't relate. I judge them. I judge the judgers very happily.
That's a smart way to put it. You also celebrate books in a sense because each of your books has a list of what you're reading.
Yes.
Was that your idea?
No. The first book my team, it was their idea to have a reader's guide in the back of the book to, if you have a book club, then it assists with the book club. There's discussion questions. And they suggested with Every Summer After having just like a what's in Carley's beach bag list. And then with the second book, I was like, I want to, instead of doing that, I want to include a list of books that I read while I was writing this book. So they didn't necessarily have to be the same, like beach reads like my book. They could just be books that I read. So that's what I did with This Summer Will Be Different too. And it's what I will do with my next book as well.
What's on your summer reading list this year?
Well, right now I'm reading A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. I am a major Ashley Poston fan. I think she has such a distinct voice, unlike anybody else. Her stories all have a little magical, they're romances, there's a magical quality, but her writing is just so gorgeous. I'm like got 20 pages to go. I left her to come here to see you guys. And the next on my list is an advanced copy of Jill Santopolo's next book, which is a follow-up to The Light We Lost, which is one of my favorite books. And when my editor forwarded me the note asking if I would read an early copy, it was this morning on the plane, and I was like, oh my God, Jill Santopolo wants me to read her book? Like, I have made it. As I admire her so much. That was a really big moment. And I just finished Tia Williams' A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, which I love Tia Williams, and I really like that book. It's a bit magical as well. And then I read, these are the books I have read, but I just read The Husbands by Holly Gramazio, and I took that on vacation with me. It's a debut novel, and it's so unique. It is about a woman, it's British. She comes home from the pub one night, and there's a strange man in her apartment, and she realizes that she's wearing a wedding band, and that there's a picture of them on her phone, and that they're married. And then soon he goes back up into the attic, and a different man walks down. And she discovers that she has a magical attic, and it is sending her new husbands. And if she wants to trade in the husband, she just has to get him into the attic, and the attic will send her a new husband. And it's funny, but it's also very smart, and it's deep and thoughtful. It gets a little dark, and then it's twisty. And as a beach read, for me, for a beach read, I like to be taken on a ride. That to me is perfect. Yeah.
Are we allowed to ask about Hollywood's interest in your books?
Sure.
Okay. Any news?
Not that I can share. So you can ask. But I'm very excited. I'm very excited. I will say that. Yeah.
So if people wanted to find out, the best way is to connect through social media?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram on social media at Carley Fortune, but I also have I have a free newsletter. So my website's carleyfortune.com, and you can sign up there. And I share more in my newsletter, and so that's kind of a good way to. And I talk about writing, and I talk about things that I like, and I only do it once a month, but it's a little bit more intimate. Yeah.
I had another question just from an interesting industry standpoint. When you started out publishing, did you get any pushback from publishers here that people in America don't want to read about Canada?
Oh, that's such a good question. Because Canadian authors are told that Americans don't want to read a book set in Canada. And it was certainly something that I had heard just over the years. And when I was trying to find an agent, I asked the agents whether it would be a problem that the book was set in Canada. And I really wanted to get published. So I wouldn't have set the book in the States, but I would have done like a Barry's Bay nowhere. Mm-hmm. Thank God I didn't. Like in hindsight, thank God I didn't. But there was only one person who said I should set it in like on the Cape, or like she had specific locations in the States where I had never been, where she thought I should set it. And that agent was Canadian.
Wow.
So, but my agent, who's based in LA, and my editor, I have two editors. My primary editor is based in New York, and they loved the setting, and they felt, that it was important to the book. And in hindsight, it was like, yeah, Barry's Bay is a character in that book. And it's one of my strengths as a writer, is writing about places. So
you definitely transport readers there.
Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned there's something coming. We can hope for a new book.
A new book next year. Yes. My fourth book. It's a summary romance. I can't share much about it, but the one thing I will share is that it is the first book I've written that does not have a now and then timeline. It's just all takes place over a summer. And it's so much easier to write a book that way. Oh my gosh. I'm like wildly in love with it. I've had such a great experience writing it, and we're going to be able to share more in about little less than 2 months. We're going to be, and the cover is like, I think it's the best cover yet. Like, it's really nice. I'm so excited. Can't wait to tell you more.
I think this is probably a good point to stop, because I know you have a lot of readers with questions.
Sure.
Should we take some
from
the audience? Now's your chance. Carley will call on you.
So many questions.
Okay. Towards the middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were saying that you like scary books, or did you ever think about going into like writing a thriller or anything? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like scary books. Have I ever thought about writing a thriller? I have not thought about writing a thriller, but I wouldn't say it's off the table. Right now, I can't really do scary. Something happened, I think, biologically to me when I was pregnant, because we were watching The Walking Dead when I was pregnant. And yeah, I loved it too. And then I gave birth, and I was like, I couldn't deal with the gore and the scary stuff. I have a harder time with it now than before I was a parent, and it's not rational. It's like, it's really physical. So I don't know, but I wouldn't have thought 5 years ago I'd published anything. So who knows?
Other questions? Take you first.
Hey, can you tell us about the Canada Reads and how Meet Me at the Lake was part of that?
Yeah, so Canada Reads is a program in Canada that has been running for over 20 years, where kind of notable Canadians pick. There's 5. They pick a book to champion, and there is it's like a kind of a reality show of books where they debate the books, and each week a book is voted off. And so this year, Meet Me at the Lake was chosen by somebody to be a book in Canada Reads. She was going to defend Meet Me at the Lake for Canada Reads, which I was not excited about. To be quite honest, I was honored that it was chosen. It was the first romance book in its 22 or 23 year history that was chosen. But for me, I just knew what would happen, there would be some it actually played out worse than I thought it would be. Like, I knew that my book would get voted off in the first round, which it did, unanimously. But which was harder to listen to than I thought it would be. Actually, really caught me off guard, like knowing that it would happen. But it was the comments about romance that were even worse than I assumed that they would be. So, for example, 2 of the defenders, the people who are talking about books, said they were glad Carley Fortune and Meet Me at the Lake was part of the program, because it would allow romance readers to be introduced to other kinds of books. And one of the men, who I admire, actually, he was the former mayor of Calgary and a really fabulous politician, said, I'm really glad Carley Fortune is part of like it's great to have Carley Fortune's book. I like Carley Fortune. She uses her platform to shine light on other Canadian authors. I'm like, what the hell does my platform have to do with my book? Like, what a thing a male author would never, like what a male author did with his social media would never be a part of a Canada Reads debate. So I really appreciated the person who defended my book, and she did a great job but it was kind of crap, honestly. Yeah, it just kind of showed so much of what I don't like about the literary discourse in Canada. But it did give me the ability to say that. I did a Toronto Life magazine interviewed me afterwards, and I was kind of able to be like, this was gross.
Other question?
So you said that for the second book you had a little bit of a difficult time writing.
Horrible.
That
It almost killed me. Yeah.
the third book, like starting the third book or thinking about the third book rough?
No, it was different. It was better because after getting through Meet Me at the Lake and certainly through the first couple of rounds of edits, I felt so much more confident. And I've heard this from other authors that the second book is really hard, but then getting to the third book, it's like, I did the hard thing. Like, I can do the hard thing. So if this book is hard, I can do it. It's going to be really hard, but I can do it. So I approached, I guess with Meet Me at the Lake, it's like, I don't even know if I'm an author. Like, am I really an author? I don't know. But after having gone through that, it was like, yes, I can write a book, even if it's really, really hard. So I felt liberated, honestly. Yeah.
More questions? Way in the back.
Are there characters in my book such as Charlie? Just like maybe Charlie, who I'd consider writing books about. Do you want a book about Charlie? Yes, someone else does too. Sorry? You want Sam's point of view. Any other orders? I would consider writing. Like, Charlie is, like, to me, the obvious person. And I love Charlie. Like, I'm a big Charlie fan. I relate to Sam so strongly. Like, that character is really, in many ways, me. And so I don't find him super attractive. I really see his flaws. And one of the edits with Every Summer After was like, my editor was like trying to get more from me about Sam. And it was hard for me. I was like, I already know who Sam is because Sam is me. So trying to put that on the page was more difficult. But yeah, I would. Like, I'm a never say never person for sure. And Charlie, like, I have people who approach me at book events with like pitches for his love story. Like, and I get requests for his often. But also I've heard people want Maggie and Peter's love story from Meet Me at the Lake. And I've already had requests for more Lucy and Felix. So there's a lot of orders.
Other questions?
So when you look back at Meet Me at the Lake, do you look at it fondly because the experience was difficult, or does it have a stigma to you?
Do I look back at Meet Me at the Lake fondly? I don't look at the experience fondly. Like, it really was awful. But I think it's the thing I'm most proud of having accomplished in my entire life. Yeah. Yeah.
Chance for questions? Any more? Over here.
What's your favorite thing about being a writer?
My favorite thing about being a writer. Well, I love making up stories. Like, I love spending my days in the worlds of the characters. I think the thing about writing for me anyway is it's like reading, where you're transported to the world of the characters. And I start writing usually in the fall and then through the winter, which is, cool in Canada. And I'm not a winter girl. I am not a winter girl. I'm not a I'm not a 109 degree girl either. And so I get to spend my time like with these characters in these beautiful places, and I love that. Like I just love it so much. And I do, when I'm done with a book, I do truly feel like it's time to move on, but then I miss it. Like I miss spending time with Lucy and Felix on the island, and yeah, I think that's probably the best part.
For not being a winter girl, you do a pretty good job describing cozy blankets and fires and all the things.
Well,
that
I
keep
am
your
Canadian.
characters-
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay. Towards the middle? Yep.
Me again?
Yep.
Okay. So where do you write? Because I
Where do I write?
Is it a computer? Is it a typewriter? Is it handwritten? What?
A quill and ink. Yeah. Where do I write? I have written every book in a different spot. I use a laptop and I use Scrivener, the program Scrivener. I wrote every summer after, mostly at the cottage, in like weird spots in chairs and on the dock, and then at our last home, and then with Mimi at the Lake, I wrote it mostly on my bed because we moved houses in the pandemic just before I gave birth, and then my husband did the paternity leave to look after the baby, so I was writing while we had a newborn at home, and I didn't have an office, and my bedroom, like I needed to shut the door so I couldn't hear them. And my husband is not quiet. There was like the baby and then the husband. So I was like, and there's not enough room in our bedroom for a desk. So it was on the bed with like noise canceling headphones. And I could never write with music before, but I had to put music on so I couldn't hear them. So that was Mimi at the Lake. And it was not the best kind of writing situation. And then the baby went into daycare. My husband went back to work. For this summer will be different. So I wrote at this little desk in our living room. And then I would see all the boys like coming home for the day and like coming up the driveway. And I would like type furiously and then just slam the laptop closed and then like yell at them if they got anywhere like close to the desk. But now we've been renovating our house. So I'm going to have an office in 2 to 3 weeks, I hope. We've been out of our home for 6 months, so it would be like my first time having a door and a desk. Very excited.
Question towards there.
Hi.
What is like the hardest part for you when it comes to the actual romance part? Is it like the tension building? Is it the spice? Is it the, like how do you develop such a good romance? Because I've read all three and I just
Oh, thank
haven't stopped doing it. So I'm just wondering, curious what's like the hardest part for you when you write that romance?
Thank you. The hardest part of the romance. It's been different for every book. But I think a couple ongoing is I have a lot of fun having them in scenes, having a lovely time. And it's like, wait, what's the tension? Like, why aren't they getting along? It's like, no, just like here they are doing fun things together. But I think the things that I'm always working on are like really regulating the like emotional response of the characters to each other, and so they're not like running too hot or too cold in a particular moment, and having all that kind of emotion make sense so that when you are getting to the like the big moments there, it's like the underpinnings are really strong. And I have an editor who is so good at making the characters helping me like deepen the characters. So it's always like that deepening and like modulating the emotion in each scene, I think. Yeah.
Towards the middle.
When you're creating these characters, obviously they're like very thought out people. Do you have like actors or actresses in mind? Do you draw reference from your real life? Like how do you go about creating a character?
So how do I go about creating characters? Are there actors or actresses? Are they based on people in real life? They're not based on people in real life. The only characters that are based on people in real life are in Every Summer After. In the first chapter, there's a hairdresser named June, who is my hairdresser named June. She's very bossy. And the roses in Meet Me at the Lake are based on, they're like an amalgamation of 6 couples who I grew up with my parents having a restaurant and an inn. And there are 3 elderly couples who kind of all came together to make the roses. And I don't think of actors or actresses when I'm writing. And they like the characters look kind of fuzzy to me. Like I can't really picture them. I like try to describe them so that you can picture them or you can cast them. But I just kind of sit and try to figure out how I want them to look so that it's kind of reflective of who they are, but different from characters I've done before. And just make it up. just make it up. But I start with the heroine, and then it's really like figuring her out to figure him out. Like and all the secondary characters too are born out of like who are the heroine and the hero, and who do they need to kind of like antagonize them or push them or support them.
I think we have time for one last question. Okay, towards the middle.
Is the beginning harder or the end harder? I don't think those are either of the things that I have trouble with. I have rewritten beginnings and endings before multiple times, but for me, that's not like the struggle. It's more like in the weeds of like the relationship and the story itself and sometimes structure, which is nice with this book that doesn't have multiple timelines, where the structure is not an issue at all. And it's more like really understanding where characters are coming from. With This Summer Will Be Different, it was the breakup scene. I broke them up over and over and over and over to get it. And then after like getting it right, there's whole other part after it kind of came to me, and I did the ending a lot too, but it was like really like what is the dark moment and how to get that right. That was like the rest of the book was hinging on.
I think that's probably a good point to end things and move into our signing portion.
Perfect.
Can we thank Carley for being here tonight once again?
Thank you.
Thank you.